I would like to first thank you, the Hong Kong Obesity Society, very much for inviting me to give this lecture on the management of obesity. Today I will go through how to manage obesity first. Now, I think we would all agree that no condition can be adequately treated unless we understand its pathophysiology. The first question we ask is, how does the body regulate weight? Weight is regulated in the hypothalamus. Within the hypothalamus, there are multiple hypothalamic nuclei, and in the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus are two classes of nerves. The first class are called neuropeptide Y nerves that also produce a agouti-related peptide. When these nerves fire, we want to look for food, we want to eat, we're hungry. The other class of nerve here, called the POMC nerves, because they express pro-opiomelanocortin. From pro-opiomelanocortin is cleaved MSH, which is a very powerful inhibitor of hunger. Those cells also produce CART, or cocaine and amphetamine regulated transcript. When they fire, we're not interested in looking for food. We're full. We don't want to eat. Those nerves then project to other areas of the hypothalamus, and somehow or other we get the conscious desire to go look for food. So if these neurons in the arcuate nucleus are where the messages originate, whether we eat or not, what regulates these nerves? Which one fires and which ones don't? Well, the main impact on the hypothalamus comes from from hormones that circulate in the bloodstream. And you can see that there are quite a lot of them. From the stomach, we have ghrelin, which stimulates hunger. And then from the gut, we have cholecystokinin, oxyntomodulin, GLP-1, PYY, and there's one missing that wasn't there when I made this slide, uroguanilin. All of these ones inhibit hunger, as does leptin that comes from fat. Leptin is a very powerful inhibitor of hunger. And then from the pancreas, we have amylin, insulin, and pancreatic polypeptide. Now, you notice that there's 9 hormones that take hunger away, but only one that stimulates hunger. And what does that tell you? It tells you that the brain is actually wired to look for food all the time. And it only takes one hormone to get it going, but it takes 9 hormones to stop it looking for food. And this makes very good biological sense, because when we were hunter-gatherers, which is only 10,000 years ago, if we didn't look for food, we didn't eat. So it was necessary to design our brain to look for food most of the time. You notice that with the exception of leptin, all of the other hormones go up and down with meals. So in normal physiology, we're looking for food except for the few hours after a meal when the hormones are such that we're not hungry. Now, apart from these regulators of food intake, there are others. There are stretch nerves in the stomach. So when the stomach is stretched, it sends a signal via the vagus nerve through to the nucleus of the tractus solitarius in the brainstem, which then projects to the hypothalamus. Recently, it's been shown in a mouse study that osteocytes appear to weigh us and send signals to the brain to inhibit food intake. That we have nutrients such as glucose, free fatty acids, and ketones that also inhibit hunger. And then we have cytokines such as TNF alpha that inhibits food intake, and we have pleasure pathways as well. Now, why is it difficult to maintain weight off? Those of you who have treated obesity know how frustrating it is. People lose weight and then gradually, not all, but most, regain the weight. And why do they regain the weight? They regain the weight because weight is a regulated parameter. We know that the body regulates a whole lot of functions. And the level at which the body regulates weight is genetically determined. So what is the evidence that weight is genetically determined? We know that identical twins are very similar in weight. If one twin is thin, so is the other. If one twin is chubby, so is the other one. And you might think, well, this is because they have very, very similar lives. However, in this study published back in 1990, they recruited dizygotic, that is non-identical, and monozygotic, identical twins, and asked the question, how similar are they in weight to each other? What's the intra-pair correlation coefficient of these twins? For dizygotic twins, the intra-pair correlation was 0.3 or thereabouts. And you notice that for identical twins, it's much higher. It's around 0.7. And this already tells you the importance of genes, because both sets of twins are reared together generally and have similar lifestyles. And yet there's much more similarity in weight in those twins that have the same genetic makeup compared to non-identical twins. But in this study, they went even further. They were able to recruit identical and non-identical twins that had been separated at birth, that had been brought up in different families. And guess what the correlation coefficient is? It's the same. It's the same whether you're reared together or reared apart, which powerfully shows you the evidence of genetic impact on weight. In this study here by Claude Bouchard in Canada, he recruited 12 pairs of identical twins, and I don't know how much he paid them, because he then force-fed them 1,000 calories extra each day for 100 days. Now, when you do that experiment and you force-feed people, you notice that some put on weight and some don't. And this is what he found. And in this slide here, you see the abdominal fat gain of one twin versus the abdominal fat gain in the other twin. And it's very striking here that if one twin didn't gain much weight, neither did the other twin. If one twin gained a lot of weight, so did the other twin. If one twin gained an average amount of weight, so did the other twin. In other words, the amount of weight you put on, if you're force-fed, depends on your genetic makeup. And then finally, the icing on the cake came from this study from Denmark, where they recruited 540 adoptees who had been adopted as babies. Now, in Denmark, they keep very good records, and they found that they were able to track down the biological parents. And they asked the question, is there any similarity in weight between these adopted individuals' weight category and their biological mother? And yes, there was. Highly statistically significant, p less than 0.0001 statistical significance for mother and less than 0.02 for father. And then they asked the question, is there any similarity in weight to the adoptive parents, the ones who brought them up, the ones who fed them, the ones whose lifestyle they shared with them? And by the way, the ones with whom they shared gut bugs, because you share your gut bugs with the people you live with. And no, there was no relationship at all. So in this study, they concluded that genetic influences have an important role in determining body fatness in adults, whereas the family environment alone has no apparent effect. However, you might be asking, how can it be genetic if it's a recent epidemic? It must be the environment. Well, yes and no. Let me explain how the environment can cause genetic obesity. And here we come to the concept of epigenetics. As you know, we have the gene sequence, but we also have the ability, the mechanism is there to either switch off or switch on a gene permanently. This is mechanisms such as methylating the promoter of a gene will silence it permanently, or methylating or acetylating the histones that bind the DNA can either leave the DNA permanently open and therefore overexpressed, or permanently closed and therefore permanently underexpressed. Now, there are multiple mechanisms of epigenetic obesity, and I'm only going to show you two. In this study you're seeing here, titled Obesity in Young Men After Famine Exposure in Utero and Early Infancy, what happened during the Second World War that Nazi-occupied Holland, parts of Nazi-occupied Holland went through a famine. And in this study, they recruited these young adults that had been in utero during the famine. And what they discovered was that if the baby was in utero in the first trimester, but not if the famine started when he was in the second or third trimester, only in the first trimester, these babies will grow up to be obese. Isn't nature wonderful if you think about what's happening there? What's happening there is that the baby, as it's wiring its brain, can sense that mother is not having enough nutrition and wires its brain to be hungry and fuel efficient. Isn't that amazing? So this is nutrition in utero is one mechanism of epigenetic obesity. Even more scary is this study here, published not so long ago in 2016 in a cohort of mice, where they took a group of mice and divided them into two groups. One group continued on the healthy, lean diet. The other group were fed a high-energy diet, junk food, and as much as they wanted. They then harvested eggs and sperm and did in vitro fertilization, took the embryos, implanted them into lean mouse mothers that had not been exposed to the high-energy diet, and then observed the offspring. And they found that if they took eggs and sperm from the mice that had been exposed to the high-energy diet, the offspring became obese, especially the female offspring became obese. So what the parents are eating can imprint the eggs and sperm, their eggs and sperm, and then if they conceive, it can lead to obesity. And this is why we're having the obesity epidemic now, partly. Now, there are other possible epigenetic triggers. In our clinic at the Austin, we ask every patient that comes to the clinic, when did the obesity start? 35% of women tell us that they were lean and no trouble keeping weight until they had their first or second baby. And then they put on extra weight and then couldn't take it off again. So we think, we haven't proven it, but we think pregnancy is one cause of epigenetic obesity in susceptible women. So how does the body maintain a steady weight? And I could also put here, why does everybody regain weight after weight loss? Why do we go back to our genetic point? How does the body do that? Well, here's a study published back in 1996 where they measured leptin. Remember, leptin is a very powerful hunger suppressor. If you don't have leptin, you develop massive obesity. Here's in the black squares is the BMI of this group of people that went on a diet, and you can see as BMI is dropping, the leptin level drops dramatically down to 10 from a value of 60 picomole per deciliter. Now, if you don't have leptin in your blood, you get hungry. Okay? Then, when ghrelin was discovered, the hormone that causes hunger, you see here ghrelin rising before breakfast and telling us go and have breakfast. Then we have breakfast and leptin falls again. Then it starts to rise and we get a bit hungry again before lunch. Then we have lunch and it comes down, goes up and down with meals. After weight loss, in the red, the ghrelin still goes up and down, but at a higher level. And in this study here from my own lab, we measured CCK, the hormone that makes you feel full. And you can see here at time 0, there's CCK, and before losing weight, after you have a meal, CCK goes up and then gradually comes down again. But following 9 weeks of dieting and some weight loss, we measured CCK again and it's lower. It's lower, so you don't feel as full and you keep eating, okay? Then we did this study where we not only measured those 3 hormones, but other hormones as well, and we asked the question, how long do they last for, these hormones? And we took 50 people and we put them on a diet, and here you see them losing weight, about 10, 12 kilos. The 2 lines are the completers and the intention to treat groups. And then we followed them for a year, 62 weeks here from the end of the weight loss phase. So we followed them for 52 weeks. And we measured leptin again. And you see here that leptin drops, and that had been shown previously, but we showed it again. But a year later, it was still low, still below baseline, and the increase in leptin seemed to correlate with the increase in weight again. With leptin, we only measured leptin in the fasting state because leptin is the only one of these hormones that doesn't go up and down with meals. But the other hormones go up and down with meals, so we had to measure them after a meal. So here you see ghrelin, amylin, CCK once again, and PYY in the pre-weight loss phase and following a meal at time 0. So when you have a meal, leptin comes down, as has been shown before, but amylin goes up, CCK goes up, as we had shown previously, and PYY goes up a little bit, and then gradually they come down to baseline. Then we put them on a diet, as I told you, and they lost about 12 kilos. And we measured ghrelin, amylin, CCK, and PYY once again. And you see that ghrelin is higher. Amylin is lower also. CCK, we had shown before, is lower. And PYY is lower. And what happened a year later? Well, a year later in the red, they're still different. So they didn't recover. Did this lead to increased hunger? Yes. Here's hunger and desire to eat measured with a visual analog scale. And hunger decreases after weight loss and then goes up. Desire to eat decreases and then goes up. And what happens straight after weight loss? Well, it still goes down and up, but at a higher level. Hunger is increased, desire to eat is increased. What about a year later? Well, they're still hungrier 1 year after and have increased desire to eat 1 year after. So now the defense of weight therefore it starts off by making you more hungry, but in addition to that, it changes your energy expenditure. This study was published in 1995. In people who gained weight, who were force-fed, they had an increase in energy expenditure of around 500 kilocalories. But those who lost 10% dropped their energy expenditure by around 300 calories a day. Interestingly, if you lose more, it's still only 300, okay? Then there was this study where they measured total resting and non-resting energy expenditure and studied weight loss, and you see that total resting expenditure drops. And then a year later, it's still down. And most of this drop in total energy expenditure was not resting energy expenditure, because nature does not fiddle with metabolism. You can't change metabolism easily, up or down. It's non-resting energy expenditure, which can also be called fidgeting, movement, that actually reflected what happened to total energy expenditure. It drops and then it stayed down. So that's 1 year that the hormones change and the energy expenditure drops. In another study we did that I'll show you in a minute, we followed people for 3 years, and if you read that paper, you see in those people that were still maintaining some weight, at 3 years, leptin was still lower and ghrelin was still higher 3 years after weight loss. And then this paper appeared showing that the energy expenditure drop was still there 6 years after the people lost weight. And in this study, they measured leptin, and you see that 6 years after weight loss, leptin is still lower than baseline. It's a bit higher than when they first lost weight, but now that they've regained some, leptin goes up a bit, but it's still lower than baseline. So with that in mind, with that knowledge in mind, it can teach you how you should treat obesity. So then the question then is, what is the best way to treat obesity? And I believe that the best way to treat obesity is to lose weight rapidly and with the help of a VLED product, plus some hunger suppressing medication. And I'll explain why in a minute. We did this study that we published in 2014, where we recruited 200 patients aged between 18 and 65, and they were randomly allocated to either a rapid program, which is a 12-week intervention, or a gradual program, which is a 36-week intervention. They all had to lose 15% of their body weight. And we then followed them for 3 years to see if it was true that the quicker you lose it, the quicker you put it on. This is the baseline characteristics of these people. There were 100 in each group, roughly, and they were well matched for age, gender, weight, BMI, waist circumference, etc., blood pressure, etc. This is the weight loss curves. In the red is the rapid group, who lost around 15% of their body weight over 12 weeks. And this is the gradual weight loss group. They lost weight rapidly, quickly, then slowed down a little bit, and then sped up at the end when they thought they weren't going to make it into the follow-up phase. This is the first bit of data from the weight loss phase. To our surprise, we found more people succeeded in the strict diet group. 78% reached 15% weight loss in the rapid group, whereas only 50% did the same in the gradual group. So it's easier to lose weight rapidly, even though the diet is stricter. And then we looked at how many people dropped out. Well, there were 3 dropped out in the rapid group, but in the gradual group, there were 18 that dropped out that said the diet was too hard. So again, the rapid program is easier, and I'll explain why in a second. So does rapid weight loss lead to faster weight regain? The answer is no, it does not. As you can see here on this graph, the regains were exactly, the gradual group regained 71% of the weight, and the rapid group regained 70% of the weight. So there's no difference in regain. It's not true. So to summarize the findings of this study, using a rapid weight loss program using a very low energy diet, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec, you're more likely to achieve target weight loss, less likely to drop out, and there's no difference in weight regain. So why did we find a higher success rate with the stricter diet? And the reason is shown in the next slide. Here you showed that we measured beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is one of the ketones. Ketones are made by the liver when it's burning fat. And beta-hydroxybutyrate increased in the rapid group, but not in the gradual group. Now, ketones take away hunger better than any drug can. And they do it 2 ways. They act on the brain to suppress hunger directly. And we discovered that they stop the change in most of these hormones, perhaps not all of them, but most of them, so that it makes the patient comfortable. Okay? So what's a very low energy diet, and why do we need to use a very low energy diet? Well, if you want to lose weight rapidly, you need to have a big gap between intake and expenditure. The trouble is, if you drop the intake a lot, you don't eat much food and you won't get all of your nutrients. So when we eat food, we not only get energy from food, we also get vitamins and minerals. If you eat an orange, you get vitamin C. If you eat red meat, you get iron. If you eat nuts, you get selenium. And dietitians will tell you you need to have a balanced diet in order to get all your nutrients. But if you only eat 800 calories, you're not going to eat enough food to get all your nutrients, and hence the VLED. These products have names like OptiSlim and OptiFast. I don't know if they are available in Hong Kong. But you need some total replacement of all the vitamins and minerals. And we know that these are complete because we had a man in our clinic some years ago who was on this OptiFast product for a whole year. And at the end of it, we measured everything we could and everything was normal. You can read the paper by putting my name in PubMed and the Medical Journal of Australia in 2008. You can read the paper yourself. And they cause rapid weight loss. They don't cause ketosis. The ketosis comes from not eating any carbs. So what I tell my patients is you have an OptiFast for breakfast and one for lunch, but at dinner time you have a meal, a proper meal. The meal contains protein and non-starchy vegetables, and I give my patients a list of non-starchy vegetables. And then I warn them that it takes 3 days to become ketotic because the body first has to use up all the stored glycogen in the muscles and liver and before it starts to burn fat. And so for the first 3 days, you're really hungry, but on day 3, the hunger disappears because the ketones appear. So I tell my patients to have some protein available. Usually I tell them a roast chicken, but it doesn't have to be a roast chicken. Any protein will do, that they can nibble for the first 2 days on top of the dinner and the 2 OptiFast, so that that way they're not too hungry, and that protein will not delay the ketosis because the body will not burn protein until all the fat is gone and will not burn fat until all the sugar is gone. And so this then leads to rapid weight loss. Now, there are people that do not tolerate the OptiFast. They just don't like the taste or the flavour. Not many, but there are a small minority, but a significant minority that don't like OptiFast. Then we have in Australia a product called Centrum Advance that is capsules of vitamins. And these contain all of the vitamins and minerals that are in one sachet of OptiFast. So those people who do not want to do the diet with the OptiFast, I tell them you have a Centrum Advance at breakfast time and then you eat some protein. Well, in Australia, I advise them to eat 1 or 2 eggs. If they're big, they can have 2. If they're not so big, 1. Then they have another Centrum Advance for lunch, and then they have a small salad and 50 grams of protein, and then the dinner is the same as I've described to you with the OptiFast. And so either way, it's okay. Now, VLEDs can be used in most regular, normal, healthy people who are overweight, but you mustn't use them in pregnant women and in women who are lactating, people that have severe decompensated organ deficiency or severe heart rhythm. Active psychosis, well, control the psychosis first, and then once it's controlled, you can use them. And people who've had a heart attack recently. And there are other people you need to be careful with. People with diabetes who are taking insulin or sulfonylureas, you have to reduce the insulin, reduce the sulfonylurea from day 1, otherwise they'll get a hypo because this diet is carb-free and the sugar will drop dramatically. Now, we did the outcomes of our clinic in Melbourne, our public hospital clinic, where we couldn't use pharmacotherapy because the patients can't afford it. They're working class people that can't afford the medication, which unfortunately is expensive. So we had to rely entirely on the ketosis. And we found that at 1 year, we had a 52% dropout rate. Now, what this is telling me is not that ketosis doesn't work. It's telling me that the patients couldn't stay away from the carbs. And you notice that in our study, the beta-hydroxybutyrate initially went up a lot, and then it started to come down as time went on. So it's hard to stay away from carbs, hence the need for the medication, for combining the diet and the medication together. So what hunger suppressors do we have? Now, I don't know what you have in Hong Kong. So we've got the ketones that everybody has, but you've got to make them yourself. But the price you pay there is to not eat carbs. Then we have phentermine, that we have 3 doses of. We have liraglutide 3 milligrams. And now recently we've had naltrexone and bupropion combination. And just 2 weeks ago, we had semaglutide released onto the market here in Australia. So what about phentermine? Well, phentermine is an sympathomimetic amine that suppresses hunger. This study by Douglas studied 50 women with refractory obesity. The mean weight loss of the 34 who completed was 6.4 kilos, but 9 of them lost 10 kilos or more. I tend to use lower doses of phentermine. I don't have any patients on 40 milligrams. I have a few on 30, the bulk are on 15. Liraglutide is an analog of GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1. There are receptors for GLP-1 throughout the brain, and it's been shown that activating these receptors reduces food intake in rats. This is a study from 2012 where they looked at 4 doses of liraglutide, 1.2, 1.8, 2.4, and 3, and they compared each of these doses with placebo or an active placebo, orlistat. Orlistat is a lipase inhibitor that reduces fat intake, fat digestion. Then, with the exception of the orlistat group, all of the other groups were then upregulated to 2.4, and then all of them went on to 3 milligrams of liraglutide. And here are the weight losses. Here you can see weight loss of the placebo here in the black circles. The orlistat and the 1.2 of liraglutide had similar weight losses, but then the 1.8, 2.4, and 3 milligrams of liraglutide had a dose-dependent further decrease. And then, if you can see, the placebo was transferred to liraglutide, the placebos, they drop weight. So liraglutide works. Here in the middle panel, you see the drop in systolic and diastolic blood pressure. One of the effects that GLP-1 agonists have is to increase heart rate. Not by much, by about 3 to 4 beats a minute. There are GLP-1 receptors in the atria of the heart. So what side effects does liraglutide cause? Causes nausea, some diarrhea, and some vomiting, but not abdominal pain. And you can see here the percentages of these side effects. And this is one of the reasons why you need to titrate the dose. And may I add that I don't use high doses of liraglutide either. I prefer, as I'll talk at the end, to use lower doses but in combination, and I'll explain why in a minute. Then we have naltrexone and bupropion, And how does it work? Well, you see here in the arcuate nucleus, I told you about MSH suppressing hunger. These are from the POMC neurons. Well, bupropion can activate POMC neurons to increase POMC. This is POMC, pro-opiomelanocortin, which is cleaved into beta MSH, alpha MSH, CLIP, which goes on to produce ACTH, which then activates the adrenal hormone. So POMC is the stress hormone, but it also produces gamma lipotropin and beta endorphin. Now, when bupropion activates POMC, you make more MSH, which inhibits hunger, but you also make more beta endorphin. Now, beta endorphin inhibits this effect of bupropion. So it's self-limiting, and bupropion alone doesn't cause much weight loss. But Michael Cowley, an Australian scientist working in America who's now back in Melbourne, had the bright idea of combining bupropion with naltrexone, which inhibits beta endorphin. So if you inhibit the inhibitor, you get this mechanism acting unopposed, and therefore you get some hunger suppression. And yes, it does work. Here is weight in one study, a similar study that was of shorter duration, but these studies were similar to each other. And the weight losses were reasonable, 8% versus 1.8. Whereas here you see where you combine a good diet, a VLED-based diet, with the drug, you get much more weight loss, 11% and 7% in the placebo. And here, this study was on patients with type 2 diabetes. The weight losses were less. So what side effects does bupropion and naltrexone combination cause? Well, it causes nausea, constipation, and vomiting. So you see it's the same thing as liraglutide, has similar side effects. Now, semaglutide, on the other hand, is a long-acting GLP-1 analog and is injected, whereas liraglutide has to be injected daily, semaglutide is injected once a week. In this study by Blundell, they did a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover trial. They measured ad libitum energy intake, ratings of appetite, thirst, nausea, as well as well-being, control of eating, food preference, resting metabolic rate, etc., in people treated once a week with 1 milligram of semaglutide weekly. And after a standardized breakfast, semaglutide compared to placebo led to lower ad libitum energy intake, 1,255 kilojoules less. They then they ate less at the subsequent meal. In other words, it reduced food intake. So semaglutide is much better for those people who don't like injections because it's only 1 injection a week. For those people who are really needle phobic, then you can't use any needles and you can use the oral agents. You have to tailor it. So how do we maintain weight loss long term? Well, you need to give the advice of you healthy eating. Don't eat junk food. Don't drink soft drink with sugar loading. Don't eat a high-fat food. You need to advise them to have regular exercise, preferably at least an hour a day. You need to advise them to be mindful. Every time they approach food, they need to tell themselves, I'm trying to maintain weight loss, I need to have small portions. The problem, of course, is we're advising the patients to have small portions at a time when their hunger is increased. It doesn't make sense. So we need to combine it with medication. So the other thing I tell my patients is to measure their weight once a week following emptying the bladder in the morning. Weigh yourself and record the weight. And if you regain 2 kilos, that's the trigger to go back on the ketogenic diet to lose just the 2 kilos. Because during the maintenance phase, you're not on any Optifast, you're not on any Centrum, you're on a balanced diet that you can eat everything, but the portions have to be smaller, okay? So this is why lifestyle alone is helpful, but not sufficient. You need the medication. So the major points about medication are the logical best pharmacological treatment would be to have not one hormone like liraglutide or semaglutide, but 3 hormones combined together at low dose. You notice you have 9 hormones that take hunger away, 8 of which go up after a meal. Each one of these hormones, CCK, PYY, oxyntomodulin, GLP-1, all of them cause nausea when you inject them. And yet, they're all secreted a bit, but when you have a meal and they all go up, you don't feel sick. Why is that? It's because each one is secreted at low dose and they all combine to give you hunger suppression. Hence the need for combining at least 3 of them. Because weight is predominantly genetic, the hormonal and energy expenditure changes that occur after weight loss designed to return the body to the set point are long-lasting, it follows that hormone replacement has to be lifelong. So if we're replacing hormones, then it should be safe to use them lifelong. Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy now to answer some questions.